Getting him to the barn nearly killed her. The alien was heavy, far heavier than he looked. His body was dense with muscle and bone, and those hard plates that covered him like armor. Miriam was not a young woman, and her back screamed in protest as she dragged the stretcher across the muddy ground. Inch by painful inch, it took her 2 hours to move him a quarter mile. By the time she got him into the old stone barn behind her cottage, she was soaked with sweat and rain, and her arms were shaking so badly she could barely hold the door open. The barn was cold and dusty, but it was dry. Miriam had used it as an emergency surgery room before, for animals too large or too injured to move to her proper clinic in the village. She had a generator here, some basic equipment, a supply of medicines that might or might not work on alien biology. She laid the alien on the old wooden table in the center of the room and looked at him properly for the first time. He was in terrible shape. The wound in his side was deep, and the dark purple blood was still flowing despite her attempts to stop it. 2 of his arms were clearly broken. One of the hard plates on his chest was cracked almost in half. His breathing was getting weaker. Miriam had no idea how to treat him. She was a veterinarian, trained in the biology of earth animals. This creature was from another world entirely. His organs could be anywhere. His blood could be toxic. The medicines that saved human lives could kill him instantly. But she had to try something. She started with the basics, the things that were true for almost every living creature she had ever treated. Stop the bleeding first. Everything else could wait. The wound in his side was the worst. She cleaned it as best she could, using water and antiseptic, watching his face for any sign of reaction. He flinched when the antiseptic touched the raw flesh, but he did not cry out. His eyes stayed fixed on her face. The metal fragment was still inside him. She could see it, gleaming dark against the darker blood. It had to come out. "This is going to hurt," she told him again, not knowing if he understood. "I am sorry. I do not have anything to give you for the pain." She reached for her surgical tools. The next 3 hours were the longest of her life. She worked slowly, carefully, removing the fragment piece by piece. The alien's blood did not clot like human blood. It was thicker, stickier, and it took her a long time to figure out how to seal the wound. She used everything she had: stitches, medical glue, even an old cauterizing tool she had not touched in years. Somewhere in the middle of the surgery, the alien lost consciousness. His body went limp, his breathing became shallow, and for a terrible moment Miriam thought she had killed him. But his heart, or whatever he had instead of a heart, kept beating. She could feel it through her fingers when she pressed against his chest. She finished the wound. She set his broken arms as best she could, splinting them with wooden boards and bandages. She cleaned the crack in his chest plate and covered it with a protective binding. Then she sat down on the dirty barn floor and cried. She did not know why she was crying. For herself, maybe. For the world. For the strangeness of sitting in a barn in the Scottish Highlands, covered in alien blood, having just saved the life of something that should be her enemy. The alien woke the next morning. Miriam had not slept. She had spent the night watching him, checking his breathing, changing his bandages when they soaked through with blood. When his eyes opened, they found her immediately. She was sitting in an old chair next to the table, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then the alien tried to sit up and immediately collapsed back down, making a sound of pain that needed no translation. "Do not move," Miriam said firmly. "You will tear your stitches." He looked at her. His face was hard to read, all angles and sharp edges, but something in those dark eyes looked almost confused. Over the next week, Miriam learned the limits of her skills. Infection set in on the 3rd day. The alien's temperature rose rapidly, his whole body burning with fever. His skin, usually cool to the touch, became hot enough to hurt her hands. He thrashed and clicked and made sounds that might have been words in his own language. Miriam did not sleep for 3 days. She packed his body with ice. She tried every antibiotic she had, testing them in tiny doses, watching for bad reactions. Most did nothing. One made him worse. Finally, on the 3rd night, she found a combination that seemed to help. His fever broke just before dawn. Miriam was kneeling beside him, pressing a cold cloth to his forehead, when his eyes suddenly focused and he looked directly at her. He was weak. So weak he could barely move. But he managed to lift one of his unbroken arms and wrap his clawed fingers around her wrist. His grip was gentle, almost hesitant. Why? The word came out broken and strange, his mouth struggling with sounds it was not built to make. Miriam looked at him. At this creature who had been part of an invasion that killed her brother. At this soldier from an army that was destroying her world. Because you needed help, she said simply. And I was here. His grip loosened. His eyes stayed on her face for a long moment. Then they closed, and he slept. Miriam sat back and let out a long breath. She did not know if she had made the right choice. She did not know what would happen when he was strong enough to stand, to walk, to fight. She did not know if she had just saved a life or created a new problem. But for now, he was alive. For now, that was enough. She stood up, her old bones aching, and went to make herself another cup of tea. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It fell in gray sheets across the Scottish Highlands, turning the old roads into rivers of mud and making the sky look like dirty wool. Dr. Miriam Cole stood at her kitchen window, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. She was watching the hills, though she did not know what she was watching for. The war had been going on for 3 years now. 3 years since the first ships appeared in the sky. 3 years since the Vethkai Dominion announced that Earth belonged to them now. 3 years of burning cities, of desperate battles, of humanity fighting back with everything it had against an enemy that seemed to have no end. Miriam was 52 years old. She had spent her whole life as a veterinarian in this remote corner of Scotland, treating sheep and cattle and the occasional injured deer. She had never married. She had never wanted to leave. This land, with its cold rain and gray skies and stubborn beauty, was her home. When the war began, most people fled south, toward the cities, toward whatever protection the military could offer. Miriam stayed. Someone had to care for the animals that remained. Someone had to keep the lights on in at least one small corner of a dying world. Her brother had not been so lucky. Thomas had been in London when the first bombardment came. She received the news 3 weeks later, delivered by a tired soldier who had walked 40 miles to bring messages to the scattered survivors in the north. Thomas was dead. Half of London was dead. The world was ending, one city at a time. Miriam put down her cold tea and pulled on her boots. The sheep in the far field needed checking. Life went on, even at the end of the world. Especially at the end of the world. She took the path behind her cottage, the one that led through the old peat bog toward the northern pastures. The ground was soft and dangerous here, and she walked carefully, testing each step. The rain had finally begun to slow, and weak sunlight was trying to break through the clouds. That was when she saw the smoke dotted rose from a spot about half a mile ahead, thick and black against the gray sky. Miriam stopped walking. Her heart began to beat faster. She had seen that kind of smoke before, on the news broadcasts before the communications went down. It was the smoke of burning metal. The smoke of crashed ships. She should turn back. She knew this. If a ship had crashed here, it could be human or it could be Vethkai. If it was human, the pilot was probably dead. If it was Vethkai, she could be walking toward her own death. But Miriam had spent 30 years responding to emergencies. 30 years of middle-of-the-night calls about difficult births and injured animals and farmers with broken bones. Her legs carried her forward before her mind could stop them. The wreckage was half buried in the bog, nose down, still smoking. It was small, perhaps a scout ship or a fighter. The design was angular and black, covered in symbols she did not recognize. Not human. Definitely not human. She should leave. She should run back to her cottage and hide and pretend she had never seen this. The HFY were monsters. Everyone knew this. They had killed millions. They showed no mercy, took no prisoners, cared nothing for human life. Then she heard the sound. It was weak, barely audible over the hiss of cooling metal and the whisper of rain. A clicking, rasping sound. The sound of something alive and in terrible pain. Miriam moved closer. The ship had torn open on impact, and she could see inside the cockpit. What she saw there made her breath stop in her throat. He was huge, nearly 7 feet long, though it was hard to tell with him curled in on himself. His body was covered in hard plates, like the shell of a crab, colored gray-blue and now cracked and bleeding. He had 4 arms, 2 of which hung at wrong angles. His face was like nothing she had ever seen, angular and sharp, with large dark eyes that reflected the weak light like mirrors. A HFY. A living, breathing HFY, dying in the mud of her homeland. Those dark eyes found her. The clicking sound stopped. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. The human woman and the alien soldier. She could see the wound in his side, where a piece of his own ship had pierced through the hard plates. Dark blood, almost purple, was pooling beneath him. His breathing was shallow and fast. He was dying. Anyone with eyes could see he was dying. Miriam thought of Thomas. She thought of London burning. She thought of every news report she had seen. Every image of HFY soldiers marching through ruined cities, stepping over human bodies without a second glance. She thought of all the reasons she had to hate this creature. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. The alien's eyes never left her face. He made no move to attack, no move to defend himself. He simply watched her, waiting to see what she would do. What kind of person would she be if she walked away? What kind of doctor? She had sworn an oath, long ago, to help those in need. The oath had been about animals, not alien invaders, but the principle was the same. Life was life. Suffering was suffering. Damn it, Miriam whispered to herself. She turned and walked back toward her cottage. Behind her, the alien made a sound that might have been surprise or might have been despair. He probably thought she was leaving him to die. 20 minutes later, she returned with her medical bag, a stretcher she used for injured sheep, and a look of grim determination on her weathered face. The alien watched her approach. Those dark mirror eyes tracked her every movement as she climbed into the wreckage and began to examine his wounds. Up close, he smelled like copper and something else, something sharp and strange. "I do not know if you understand me," Miriam said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "But I am going to try to help you. This is probably going to hurt. I am sorry for that." She did not know if he understood. She did not know if he would try to kill her the moment he had the strength. She did not know if she was making the worst mistake of her life. But she was a doctor, and he was dying. And in the end, that was all that mattered. She got to work. His name was Keth, single quotes VOR. It took him 2 weeks to say it clearly enough for Miriam to understand. His mouth was not made for human words, and her ears were not trained for the clicking, rasping sounds of his language. But slowly, word by word, they learned to talk to each other. He healed faster than she expected. His body, she discovered, was built for survival in ways that human bodies were not. Bones that would have taken months to mend in a human knitted together in weeks. The wound in his side closed and scarred over with remarkable speed. By the end of the first month, he could sit up. By the end of the second, he could stand, but he was not yet strong. And so he stayed in the barn, watching Miriam come and go, answering her questions when she asked them, and slowly beginning to ask questions of his own. "You are a healer," he said one evening. It was not a question that Miriam was changing the bandages on his chest. The crack in his plates was healing, but slowly. "Yes," she said. "For animals mostly. Sheep, cattle, dogs. Sometimes horses. Not for your own kind? We have different healers for humans. Doctors, we call them. I am trained only for animals." She paused, then smiled slightly. "I suppose you are my first alien patient." Kethver was silent for a moment. "Among my people," he said slowly, "healers are rare, valuable. They serve only those who have earned their service. Earned it how? Through battle. Through status. Through service to the Dominion." His dark eyes studied her face. A healer would never tend to a stranger. Never to someone who had not paid or promised payment. Miriam finished with the bandages and sat back. "That sounds lonely. I do not understand. If you can only get help when you have earned it, what happens when you are young? When you are new? When you have nothing to offer?" Kethver was quiet for a long time. "The weak do not survive," he said finally. "This is the way of my people. The way of the Dominion. Strength is all that matters. Those who cannot contribute are left behind." Miriam thought about this. She thought about hospitals, about charities, about the way human societies, for all their flaws, tried to care for those who could not care for themselves. She thought about her own work, the long nights spent with sick animals whose owners could not afford to pay. "We are different," she said. "My people, I mean. We have a belief that all life has value. Not just the strong, not just the useful, everyone." She paused. "We do not always live up to this belief. We fail often. But we try. Why?" It was such a simple question. And yet it was perhaps the hardest question anyone had ever asked her. "Because suffering is suffering," Miriam said slowly. "Because I cannot look at something in pain and walk away. Because," she struggled to find the right words, "because we believe that how we treat the weakest among us shows who we truly are." Kethver made a sound she could not interpret. "Your people are very strange, so I have been told." As the weeks passed, Kethver began to talk more. About his world, about his people, about the war. The Vethkai Dominion, she learned, had been conquering planets for thousands of years. They were not evil in the way she had imagined. They were simply different. Their entire culture was built on strength, on dominance, on the idea that the powerful had the right to rule and the weak had the duty to serve or die. They had expected Earth to fall quickly. Humans were soft. Humans were weak. Humans wasted resources caring for the old, the sick, the damaged. By Vethkai logic, this made humans easy prey. "We were wrong," Kethver said one evening. He was sitting up now, able to move without pain, though he was still not strong enough to walk far. 3 years we have fought. 3 years, and still your people resist. Still they fight. Still they refuse to surrender. Did you expect us to give up?" "Yes." His voice was flat, honest. "Your species has every reason to give up. You are outmatched, outgunned. You cannot win. And yet you fight on. You fight for each other. For strangers you will never meet. For people who will never know your names." He turned his dark eyes to her. "We did not understand this. We still do not understand this." Miriam was quiet for a moment. "I think," she said slowly, "that is exactly why we cannot give up. Because we care. Because we cannot bear to see others suffer. Even when fighting is hopeless, we fight. because the alternative is to abandon each other. And that is something we cannot do. Cannot? Or will not? Is there a difference? Cathfer looked at her for a long time. Then he made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You saved me," he said. "I am your enemy. I have killed your people. I am part of a force that is destroying your world. And yet you saved me, asked nothing from me, expected nothing from me." He shook his head slowly. "Among my people, this would be called weakness, foolishness, a waste of resources. And what do you call it?" Cathfer was silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was strange, almost uncertain. "I do not have a word for it," he said. "My people do not have a word for what you have done, what you are." He paused. "Perhaps we need one." That night, Miriam lay in her bed and listened to the wind howling outside. She thought about the alien in her barn, about the things he had said, about the world that was burning beyond her small corner of Scotland. She thought about weakness and strength, about mercy and power, about what it meant to be human. She did not have any answers. But for the first time in 3 years, she felt something like hope. Miriam woke to the sound of static. It was early morning, the sky just beginning to lighten in the east. She had fallen asleep in her chair by the fire, a book open on her lap, exhausted from another long day of caring for her unusual patient. But something had woken her. A sound coming from outside. She pulled on her boots and coat and stepped out into the cold morning air. The sound was coming from the direction of the crashed ship, the wreckage that still lay half buried in the bog behind her cottage. When she reached the crash site, her blood went cold. Cathfer was there. He was kneeling in the mud beside his ruined ship, his clawed hands moving across a panel that Miriam had assumed was destroyed. Lights flickered in the dim morning light. The static she had heard was coming from the ship's communication system, still somehow working after all this time. He was sending a signal. He was calling his people. Miriam stood very still. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had trusted him. She had cared for him, talked with him, begun to think of him almost as a friend. And now he was betraying her. "You have called them here," she said. Her voice was flat, empty. "Your people. You have led them right to me." Cathfer turned. His movements were still slow, still careful. He was not yet fully healed. But he was strong enough to stand now, strong enough to walk, strong enough to do this. "Yes," he said. "I have called them." Miriam felt something break inside her. All those weeks of work, all those sleepless nights, all that hope. And in the end, she was just another foolish human, trusting a creature that could never truly change. "I should have let you die," she whispered. "Perhaps." Cathfer's voice was calm, almost gentle. "But you did not. And because you did not, everything has changed." Miriam looked at him, really looked at him, trying to see past her anger and fear. There was something different about him this morning. Something in the way he held himself, something in those dark mirror eyes. "I do not understand," she said. "No," Cathfer agreed. "You do not. Let me explain." He moved away from the ship, limping slightly, and came to stand before her. Even weakened, he towered over her. His clawed hands hung at his sides, making no move to threaten her. "Among my people," he said, "I am not simply a soldier. I am not simply an officer. I am Cathfer of the Seventh Spiral, third in line to the throne of the Dominion." Miriam stared at him. "You are? Royalty?" "In your terms, yes. When my ship was shot down, when I disappeared, my people assumed I was dead. The line of succession moved on. Wars do not wait for missing princes." A sound that might have been bitter amusement. "I was forgotten, but now you have told them you are alive." "Yes, and I have told them more than that." Kethfer's eyes never left her face. I have told them what happened here. What you did. What it means. What does it mean? Kethfer was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was different. Heavier. More serious. For 3,000 years, the Dominion has conquered. We have taken world after world, species after species. We believed ourselves superior because we were strong, because we did not waste resources on weakness, because we did not understand mercy. He paused. We thought this made us powerful. We thought this was why we won. And now? Now I have seen something different. I have seen a species that cares for its enemies, that heals without payment, that values life simply because it is life. He shook his head slowly. I have seen true strength, Miriam. And it is not what I was taught. Miriam did not know what to say. She stood in the cold morning air, looking at the alien prince who should have been her enemy, and felt the world shifting under her feet. Your people, Kethfer continued, fight so hard not because they are violent, but because they love so deeply. They protect the weak because they believe the weak deserve protection. They sacrifice themselves for strangers because they cannot bear to see others suffer. His voice dropped. We called this weakness. We were wrong. What did you tell them? Miriam asked. Your people. What did you say in your transmission? I told them the truth. I told them that we have been fighting a war we cannot win. Not because humans have better weapons. Not because they are more numerous. But because they have something we do not have. Something we do not even have a word for. Mercy. More than mercy. Hope. Compassion. The belief that tomorrow can be better than today. That strangers are worth saving. That kindness is not weakness, but strength. Kethfer made a sound low in his throat. I told them that in 3 months in a barn in Scotland, I learned more about true power than in 100 years of war. Miriam felt tears on her cheeks. She did not know when she had started crying. They are coming, she said. Your people. The ships. They will be here soon. Yes. What will happen when they arrive? Kethfer looked at her. And for the first time since she had met him, she saw something in those alien eyes that she recognized. Something almost human. I do not know, he admitted. I do not know if they will believe me. I do not know if my words will change anything. They may kill us both. They may burn this world to ash and never think of what I said again. But you sent the message anyway. Yes. He straightened, despite his injuries, standing as tall as he could. Because you taught me something, Miriam Cole. You taught me that some things are worth doing even when you cannot know the outcome. That helping others is not a transaction, but a gift. That true strength is not the power to destroy, but the courage to heal. He looked up at the lightening sky, where somewhere, far above, ships were already turning toward Earth. Whatever happens next, he said, I want them to know what I know. I want them to see what I have seen. And if there is any chance at all, that this war can end differently, I had to try. Miriam wiped her eyes. You sound almost human, she said. Kethfer made that sound again, the one that might have been a laugh. Perhaps, he said. Perhaps that is not such a bad thing. They came at dawn. Miriam was standing at her cottage door, a cup of tea in her hands, watching the sky turn from black to gray to pale gold. She had not slept. She had spent the whole night sitting with Kethfer, talking about everything and nothing, waiting for whatever was coming. The first ship appeared as a dark spot against the rising sun. Then another. Then a dozen. Then 100. Within minutes, the sky was full of them. Black angular shapes, blocking out the light, descending toward the earth like a swarm of locusts. Miriam had seen pictures of Vethkai fleets on the news broadcasts, back when the broadcast still worked. The pictures could not capture this. The sheer scale of it. The terrible beauty. They were here to kill her. She was sure of it. Whatever Cuthbert had said, whatever message he had sent, these were conquerors. These were the creatures who had burned London and Paris and Beijing. They would not stop for one old woman and her stories of mercy. She took a sip of her tea. It was good tea. She had been saving this particular blend for a special occasion. This seemed special enough. Cuthbert limped out of the barn and came to stand beside her. He looked up at the sky, at the ships of his people descending all around them. His face was calm, unreadable. "The Northern Fleet," he said quietly. "The entire Northern Fleet. I did not expect so many. Is that bad? I do not know." The ships landed in the fields around her cottage, on the beaches below the cliffs, across the moors as far as she could see. They came down gently, almost silently, settling into the Scottish mud like great dark birds coming home to roost. And then the doors opened. Miriam watched as HFY soldiers emerged from the ships. Hundreds of them, thousands. They wore armor that gleamed like oil in the morning light, and they carried weapons that had destroyed cities. They were terrifying. They were magnificent. They were everything humanity had learned to fear in 3 years of war. They formed ranks before her cottage, line after line of alien warriors standing in perfect formation, filling the fields and hills and beaches with their presence. The ground itself seemed to tremble under the weight of them. Miriam took another sip of her tea. A single figure emerged from the largest ship. She was huge, even by HFY standards, her body covered in scars and markings that spoke of countless battles. She walked with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. Fleet Commander, Miriam guessed. Perhaps even higher. The commander stopped before Miriam's threshold. For a long moment, she simply stood there, looking down at the small human woman with the cup of tea. Then she knelt. Miriam nearly dropped her cup. The commander lowered herself to the ground, her armored knees pressing into the Scottish mud. She removed her weapon from her belt and placed it at Miriam's feet. Her head bowed behind her, like a wave rolling across the land. The other soldiers did the same. One by one, row by row, they knelt. They placed their weapons on the ground. They bowed their heads. Thousands of HFY warriors, the greatest army in the galaxy, kneeling before a veterinarian's cottage door. "We come and surrender," the commander said. Her voice was deep and resonant, carrying across the silent assembly. "Not to your armies, not to your governments, not to your weapons. We surrender to you, Dr. Miriam Cole, the one who showed our prince what we had forgotten." Miriam's hands were shaking. The tea spilled over her fingers, hot and real, proof that this was not a dream. "I do not understand," she managed to say. The commander raised her head. Her eyes were like Cuthbert's dark mirrors that reflected Miriam's own confused face. 3,000 years ago, the commander said, before the Dominion, before conquest, our people had a word. Velthara. It means one who heals without price, one who gives without expecting return." She paused. "We thought it was a myth, a weakness from our primitive past, something we had evolved beyond." She gestured toward Cuthbert, who stood silently beside Miriam. "Our prince told us what you did, how you found him dying in the mud, how you saved him, though he was your enemy, how you asked nothing in return." The commander's voice grew quieter. "We did not believe him. How could we? Such a thing was impossible. It went against everything we knew about the universe." "So why are you here?" Miriam asked. "Because you made us ask questions we had never asked before. Questions about strength and weakness. Questions about what makes a people great." The commander's eyes were intense, almost desperate. "For 3 years, we have fought your kind. We expected easy victory. Instead, We found something we could not understand. Soldiers who sacrificed themselves for strangers. Cities that sheltered refugees from other lands. Doctors who treated wounded enemies. She shook her head slowly. We thought this was foolishness. We thought it made you weak. But we could not conquer you. No matter how many battles we won, no matter how many cities we burned, we could not break you. Because you were not fighting for territory or resources. You were fighting for each other. Miriam thought about the last 3 years. The stories she had heard. The soldiers who carried wounded comrades for miles. The civilians who shared their last food with refugees. The doctors who worked until they collapsed. The quiet everyday heroism of people who refused to give up on each other. We did not understand, she said softly. We were just doing what we do. Yes, the commander's voice was almost reverent. You were just doing what you do. And that is why you have defeated us. She gestured to the kneeling army behind her. These soldiers have seen what you do. They have heard the prince's words. They have asked themselves the questions we should have asked 3,000 years ago. And they have decided that they do not want to conquer anymore. She looked directly into Miriam's eyes. They want to learn. Miriam felt Kethfer move beside her. He stepped forward, addressing his people in his own language, the clicking and rasping sounds flowing over the assembled thousands. When he finished, the commander nodded and translated. He says that you taught him that strength is not the power to destroy, but the courage to heal. He says that mercy is not weakness, but the greatest strength of all. He says that his people have been building an empire, but they have forgotten how to build a home. Miriam stood in her doorway, looking out at the alien army that knelt before her. She thought about her brother Thomas, dead in London. She thought about all the people who had died in this war, human and Vethkai alike. She thought about hate and fear and the long road that had brought her to this moment. Then she thought about a dying creature in a bog, and the simple choice she had made. She set down her cup of tea. She stepped forward, past her threshold, and extended her hand to the kneeling commander. Stand up, she said quietly. In my culture, we do not kneel to anyone. We stand together, as equals. The commander looked at her hand. For a long moment, she did not move. Then, slowly, she reached out and wrapped her clawed fingers around Miriam's small human hand. She stood. Behind her, one by one, the other soldiers rose. They did not pick up their weapons. They simply stood, looking at the human woman who had shown them a different way. What happens now? Miriam asked. The commander almost smiled. Now, she said, you teach us. Teach us what it means to be Valthara. Teach us how to build instead of destroy. Teach us how to be more than we are. Miriam looked at the thousands of alien faces waiting for her answer. She thought about the enormity of what was being asked. The responsibility. The impossibility of it all. Then she thought about her brother. About what he would have said if he could see this moment. She smiled. Well, she said, I suppose we should start with tea. In my culture, all important conversations begin with tea. She turned and walked back into her cottage, leaving the door open behind her. After a moment, the commander followed, and with that single step, the war was over.